I'm here with David Napolitano about It's Napolitano. Of course. So, Mr. Napoleon, thank you very much for being a part of this interview. So, tell me about this project you have. Well, it's called the 52-Week Movie Challenge. I watch a film I've never seen before. I base it on a different theme, and I talk about it however I want. So with The Secret of Nim, the theme was about animals. And since the film was considered a cult classic, I thought I'd give my piece on why it doesn't hold up. While we're on the subject of your reviews, you just released a new review, and I'm sure that our audiences would like to see that. So here is a review of The Truman Show by Mr. Telefono. Checkmate! It's not that the story of a film is so good because the themes are deep. Rather, the themes are so deep because the story is so good. Even the simple charm of the journey of a man discovering the world outside their bubble can pave way to a deeper appreciation of a film underneath its surface. As far as thinking person sci-fis go, Truman Show is one of the best faux show.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
The Truman Show is the 1998 sci-fi dramedy about Truman Burbank, played by Jim Carrey. He's the subject of the titular reality show on a 24/7 broadcast of his life in Sea Haven, Florida that's controlled by the showrunner Christoph, played by Ed Harris. Truman lives a nice and stable suburban life with his wife. As he starts to see the strings being pulled in his reality, he slowly puts together that everything in his life may have been predetermined by a higher power and goes out of his way to escape his bubble. The Truman Show is one of those films on my list to watch that I was the most excited to see. Jim Carrey, for as funny as he is, has such a knack for acting outside his comfort zone. The premise, as I described, writes itself in its ingenuity. And I'm just a sucker for top-notch sci-fi. Go figure. When I watched The Truman Show for the first time, I absolutely loved it. By the same token, I wasn't able to entirely put my finger on it. I was totally enthralled with the journey embarked by Truman in what I consider Carrey's best performance to date, with his trademark mania and surprising sincerity. I was so invested to the point where I never even considered the deeper meanings of the film. Upon my second viewing, however, my love for the film both deepened and became totally clear. The Truman Show, even with all its social commentary on media, never insists upon its depth. This is definitely what I would call an idea film. You know, films like Inception, Fight Club, or even Blade Runner. Films about so many different ideas that we just have to talk about the hidden meanings over a cup of coffee. Some of the questions that come up when discussing these films are the following. Was Cobb dreaming? Was Tyler Durden real? Was Deckard a replicant? As much as I love those films, I found that these questions focus too much on the film's individual logistics, rather than the journeys themselves. I feel that boiling down the events of a film down to a question that can be answered by a simple yes, no, or even maybe, along with some evidence, really downplays the power of characterization in film, as well as the imaginative discourse to be had with film criticism. It was then I asked more introspective questions about these films. Like, why doesn't Cobb care about the totem falling over? What void does Tyler Durden fill for the narrator? What does Deckard do with the life that he has remaining? A character's choices ultimately root the ambiguities of the idea film, not the plot twists themselves. Going back to The Truman Show, rather than let the intricacies of its story structure and themes characterize its depth, director Peter Weir allows for the growth of Truman, as well as the inner workings of the world, to dictate the film's deeper meaning. Because of that, The Truman Show is one of the few films I've seen where the complex and in-depth themes and ideas spur from a very human and emotional center. With that in mind, the ultimate question I found asking this film is, what would Truman's life be outside Sea Haven? In breaking down The Truman Show, the film succeeds as an inspiring coming-of-age story, within a caustic sci-fi story, within a grander meta-narrative of what happens when a character so engaging and memorable defies narrative conventions to take on a life of their own. All of that sounds really compact, but how does that make for such a simple viewing where Truman's emotional journey remains the central focus? Let me explain by doing something I wouldn't usually do for these reviews. Go into depth on the film's ending and what I think would happen beyond the film's credits. Here's your spoiler warning for a 22-year-old film. Here's the time code if you only want to see the ending for yourself. Buckle up, here we go. The Truman Show makes no secret that it considers the American dream as a childish belief. Every day is a naive routine with Truman as the apple of everybody's eye. People go to work, crank out the 9 to 5, say hi to all the smiling friends and neighbors, and come home to a stable family or significant other. Very little extraordinary things happen, but the show's viewers are just happy to see Truman do things that they usually do. The key to what makes Truman's journey feel so special comes from how the film, starting from the second act, comes from Truman's genuine sense of growing curiosity, not from spontaneous, cynical spite. In talking about Truman's journey, it's impossible not to discuss how the Truman Show comments on the reality TV craze. Given Truman's journey and his outcome, it's clear that Weir sees recapturing nostalgia as just a fleeting endeavor. Yeah, we all like to have an idyllic life and be surrounded by people who love each other very much, but how does that help us grow? It's ironic because for a genre called reality TV, this isn't what it's all about. Rarely is reality ever as extreme, over the top, or a script with familiar beats as what we see in any given media. This brings to another point that's fascinated me. If the audience cheered when Truman left his comfort zone, then why did they all move on to the next thing on TV like it's no big deal? At first I considered The Truman Show as a film with a happy ending, but the more I thought about it, the more I had a more nuanced perspective on it. As an ending to a sci-fi film, it comes off as somewhat bleak, as Truman leaves a life of fame and adoration in favor of a mundane one of anonymity. No one will care that he exists. Or will they? Given Truman's celebrity status, it wouldn't be out of the question for him to be bombarded with paparazzi, a similarly collective display of affection compared to Sea Haven. The downside would be that, with the exception of a possible girlfriend, everyone will love Truman based on what they've seen on TV, not for who he is. In that regard, it's almost as if Truman never left his comfort zone at all. There really wouldn't be any difference between Sea Haven and the real world. This would ultimately make The Truman Show a chilling cautionary tale on how celebrity culture eats away at the fabric of a personal life. There's also the ending as a coming-of-age story. In that regard, it's apparently inspiring. Truman ultimately decides to leave his comfort zone so he can take on the larger scope of the world. Even if the paparazzi loves him for his public image rather than his personality, that woman, a possible interest, will be the one who loves him for who he truly is. If anything, the life that Carrey lives right now doesn't seem that far off from what the story beyond The Truman Show would hold. An actor who goes from being primarily known as a major star to one who's taken a few steps out of the spotlight would make the story beyond the film give its satisfying conclusion. It even says a lot about finding love in one person over millions of people. In that regard, this would make The Truman Show a much more optimistic and heartfelt story about how the romance for one woman can feel just as loving, if not more so, than the whole world. Given these two implications, I ultimately consider the ending of the film more bittersweet than purely optimistic or pessimistic. I honestly think that perfectly fits the film too. Reality TV far often goes for emotions that can easily be felt, seen, or understood. Pure happiness, anger, and sadness make drama feel urgent, but never relatable. That welcoming level of uncertainty, as hinted in the ending of The Truman Show, ultimately serves as the antidote for everything that has to be publicized, broadcast, and even sensationalized to the nth degree. As for The Truman Show itself, I can safely say it's one of the best films ever made. If anything, it shatters the illusion that all idea films have to be effective, yet cold and precise. They can work just as well as what's going on upon the surface as well as what's going on underneath. Whether I want to see The Truman Show as a coming-of-age story or a sci-fi narrative, it's still a great film on equal platforms with individual merits. On a scale of 1 to 10, The Truman Show is definitely a primetime event. So what's your take on The Truman Show? Have you seen it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, what's your favorite film of the 90s? Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you'll know when I post my future videos. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at FilmGeekDave. That's all for today, and I'll see you next time when I review a family film.
My machine works.